Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. We're going to give this a few seconds as people come in. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome, welcome. We're excited that you are here. People are still populating in, so we're just going to give it another minute. As we have a good group joining us today. So we are thrilled that you're here with us from across the state and possibly across the country. Okay, let's get started because we've got a lot to get to this morning. And we have great speakers lined up. And I know you're all of your time is precious. And so we want to be able to uh, give you the information that we have and are so excited that you have joined us today. So good morning, everyone. My name is Kim Coffrin. I'm the Senior Director of Education here at Children at Risk, and we are thrilled for you to be here and joining us on this in this conversation. Um, uh, we are here for the Early Childhood Summit, Seeds of Change, Cultivating Big Ideas for Little Learners. But before we get into the content of our morning, I want to let you all know that the summit's being recorded. After the event concludes, we will reach out to all the registrants to share a copy of the slides, the link to the recording, and any resources that are shared and discussed today. While our team has disabled the open chat feature, we still encourage you to engage with us and ask questions of our experts today. You can use the Q&A feature and we will do our best to address those live and as time allows. We want to send a huge thank you to our sponsor, HEB, for their generous support for the Texas Family Leadership Council learning events, which this is one of. And we also want to thank our many partners and early childhood advocates who have supported this event, Children at Risk Advocacy, and our mission to improve the quality, quantity, and sustainability of early childhood education across Texas. And so with that, let's get started. So as many of you are aware, we concluded the 89th legislative session in June, and the next regular legislative session won't start until January of 2027. This in between time is called our interim, and this is when a lot of the actual work gets done. So when we get to session, it is fast and furious, and we know what we want to do. And this year we have a busy one. As you will hear today, there are several opportunities for all of us to be engaged over the next 17 months to help advocate and improve our early childhood education and care systems across the multiple state agencies. Today, you will first hear from one of our legislative champions, Representative Armando Wally. We will zoom out and look at the child care with a national perspective by having a conversation with Elliot Aspel, who has a new book out called Raising a Nation. Then we'll take a deep dive and look into some other states, Georgia and Arkansas, to be specific. We have Commissioner Amy Jacobs from Georgia and Tanya Williams, the Education Division Director for Arkansas Department of Ed. And then our final panelists will focus on how can child care providers and stakeholders and advocates get involved and make a difference. We will have a conversation with two fantastic advocates from Louisiana, Libby and Rochelle, who will share their insights and the lessons learned they have learned in Louisiana. But to start off in true Children at Risk fashion, we're going to take a quick look at data. So if Erica, you can join, put the slides back up. I'm going to run through a few slides to go over our data quick, and then we'll turn it over to Man and Wally. Here we go. All right. So Texas data. So many of you, if you have heard us talk before, the stat is not new to you, but 1 in 10 children in America live in Texas. So we have a 2.3 million children under the age of 6. 2.3 million children is more than the entire population of New Mexico. So it is no small feat when we talk about how to change our early childhood education systems, because we have a large number of kiddos to take care of here in Texas. And we know that 1 in 10 children under the age of 6 from low-income working parents live in childcare deserts. So what are childcare deserts? Go ahead, Erica. Uh, we have looked at childcare desert since 2017. Desert is where there is a zip code where there's 3 times the number of children than there are available childcare seats. Across the state, we have just under 1 million childcare seats. We have 991,000 childcare seats. That's actually down from last year, about 75,000 seats that we lost from 2023 to 2024. We look at this data as of September of each year. So this data will be digging into the 2025 data soon. But that was our state of the landscape last year. When we look at the subsidy childcare, that number is is our low income kiddos that is supported by the Child Care Development Block Grant. That's federal funding that we get from the federal government. That number is about 125,000 for our 0 to 6 kiddos. And then when we look at our Texas Rising Star, which is Texas's quality rating system, that number is about 84,000 seats are available. You can see that number has gone up, and that doesn't necessarily mean more kids are being served, like new kids are being served because new money, because this was last year's data, but this is because more programs are getting on the Texas Rising Star program and are reaching that quality level, which is exciting to see. Go ahead, Erica. Like I said, we've been tracking this data for almost 10 years. And this is a snapshot of our data for the last 5. You can see that big dip in 21. Of course, that was because of COVID. You can see the big bounce back. And we're kind of settling down to where we were right before the pandemic. And that top line is all overall childcare. We know the subsidy is in the middle line, so that is ticking up. And then you can see that jump in the bottom line, which is our Texas Rising Star programs, again, because more programs are getting into that quality system, which we're excited about. Go ahead, Erica. This is that participation of TRS programs. You can see that we are at just about 59% of our programs that are participating in Texas Rising Star, which is continuing to go up, which we're excited to see. And then you can see that the right side is where children are actually choosing care. And so that's where we can see that 68% of them are in quality childcare. So even though our percentage is just a little bit lower, more parents are choosing quality programs, which is also fantastic to see. Go ahead, Erica. We've also been tracking family childcare. We know they took a dip like everybody else did during COVID. They bounced back a little bit, but now they are continuing to see a decrease. And this is something that we have been concerned of. Mandy's going to go over some legislation that was passed to help support family childcare in a bit. And we know Texas Workforce Commission is also focused on supporting family childcare to see how we can get that number to increase. And then this is kind of gives us a snapshot of how many kids are being served. So we know we get the money from the federal government, and through those dollars, we're serving about 17% of the kids that actually could qualify. So we know the need is much bigger than what the money we have currently is available to serve those children. And so while we are doing a good job with the money we have, we know if we served more with more money, we can serve more children. So, and the need is there for low-income working families. And then today, go ahead, Erica, to the next slide. So today we're really talking about these opportunities that we have during the interim, how we can change potentially governance. And I wanted to kind of give you a visual of where we are across the sectors, across state agencies. So these are the 6 different state agencies that that address some form of early childhood programming. So we have Health and Human Services Commission, which has the child care regulations, child care licensing, as we call it, family supports. This is 211. This is ECI. This is Texas Thriving Families, Medicare and CHIP, SNAP. Big commission. Then we have Texas Workforce Commission, which a lot of us work with closely, and they have the Child Care Subsidy Program and the Texas Rising Star Program. Texas Education Agency is pre-K and special ed. Department of Family Protective Services is the Child Abuse and Neglect State Intake, Foster Care, Kinship Care, and Department of State Health Services is Maternal Child Health and help me grow. And then, of course, we can't forget Department of Ag, because they have the child care and food program that many of our child care programs participate in. So you can see that there are 6 state agencies across the board that our child care programs and our families touch, depending on what services they're providing children. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about what those opportunities are during the interim, as we have some new opportunities for us to participate in. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Mandy, and Representative Wally.
Good morning. Thank you, Kim. Good morning, everybody. Extremely excited today and very honored to have Representative Wally join us today, who's been a huge champion. Representative Wally is from the Aldine community in the greater Houston area. It is his 9th term. Sits on appropriations and is chair on articles, the subcommittee 6, 7, and 8. And Chairman, I first have to say thank you. Throughout your years, it is clear that children and families have been a priority and focus for you in regards to health and safety and economic security. This past session, you were a huge champion, and also in the past around maternal health, trying to decrease food insecurity, and you truly carried efforts to invest in early childhood education, childcare, $100 million for childcare to support and assist low-income working families to be able to access quality early education. Thank you. I know you carried the rider, but I also know you love sports. And so for my kids, it's like you also carried the team. You carried the team on making sure that we invested in early childhood education. So thank you very much. And I was just wondering, why was this a priority for you, and what does it mean for children and families?
Well, thank you, Mandy, and thank you to Children at Risk and all the partners here. And look, it's personal for me. I'm a dad. uh, my wife and I, we rear a 14 and 11-year-old, um, and grew up with a single mom. So, I was the oldest of 5. So on that front, it's personal, just from family experience, but just talking to constituents and talking to my constituents, and it's very critical that childcare be part of our policy, priorities going forward. And we were successful in that this time. So $100 million. It does seem like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money. But in the grand scheme, we need to get some more resources in there. But this was I think, is a first step for us. So proud of the work that we're going to continue to do. And so we should celebrate this victory, because we don't do it without you guys also pushing from y'all's advocacy perspective.
Yeah, that's great. And it was a huge investment. Again, first time that Texas has taken this step. What advice? So advocates, families, yeah, we have more money. Is it continuous? I mean, it's a budget cycle, right? So I'm assuming, you encourage people, what would be the advice to others that you have to make sure that this is sustainable and that Texas continues to invest?
Well, I would keep doing what you guys are doing. You got to obviously reach out to every House member on a bipartisan basis, because this is a statewide. This $100 million has statewide impact. Um, we certainly know that this was not just a one-time thing. We've been working on this, even before COVID. Obviously, when the dollars started to go down in the reimbursements for some of the providers, we thought, this other section of the scholarship would be a good use of these dollars. And so I would just continue to push. You guys have been very good at that, and kind of triangulating the legislature into doing the right thing. And we had to be creative too on how we used the 100 mil. Our team, got to work trying to figure out how to find $100 million. They did, and working with the Senate, and Kara on my team was instrumental in that. So I want to give her a shout out, and using unspent TANF dollars. So because we want it to be sustainable, we don't want it just to be a one shot and be done with it. You know.
Mhm. That's great. When, we look at the Texas legislature in the past, slowly, I feel like the legislature has been paying more attention than it has around childcare. Historically, it's been around data and transparency. It's been around quality, realizing that childcare, it just isn't babysitting. Quality really matters. And this year it was money. So my question to you is, what is resonating with legislators when you were trying to convince folks to invest for the first time? What messages were working, and anything that we need to tweak or advocates need to tweak, and on how they're receptive to the idea?
Uh, Look, I mean, childcare was a question in the presidential debate, right? So I think it was asked twice during the presidential debate leading up to the election. So it's out there, it's out in the sphere. Um, uh, I think continuing just to touch members. Look, we had to use a lot of political capital on our end to try to get it done. And the reality is, like, I'm a Democrat in a Republican controlled legislature. So we have to work in a bipartisan way. And so I was um, thankful for the speaker and the um, uh, Chair Huffman and Dr. Bonin for for helping us get this over the line. So it takes an enormous amount of work, making sure you're in folks' offices and being aggressive, but not too aggressive, so that you don't um, upset members. 'Cause,
Mhm.
there's a balance to that. But we used a lot of capital for this, and this was I mean, this one in summary BT, where our office used an extreme amount of capital to try to get it done, and this one so far is held, so it did not get vetoed, like line item vetoed like the other one.
We appreciate it.
Yeah,
And we've got to keep at it. And what is needed is for leadership, for the legislature, the state, to prioritize early childhood education like it does for education, health, workforce,
right,
water, our infrastructure. It's part of our
right.
it's part of our infrastructure. Do you see us going in that manner? I know that you've done a lot in regards to workforce through your
Mhm.
tenure with water, and it becomes a priority after a while, or at least it's expected that we are going to address it year after year. I would
Right.
assume. And sometimes when it comes to children's issues or family issues, social services like, well, they took care of it this year, so we're going to take a pause and maybe we'll get to it. Do you see an opportunity for us to get it as a priority?
Yes, I do. With y'all's work, we can continue it being a priority. Um, Look, I mean, at the national level, you have, whatever party's in control. Working people need a little, just a little help. I mean, not a handout, but a little help when somebody's trying to put food on the table and go to work and provide for their families, pay the bills and for their prescription drugs. Childcare, you know, people are just working sometimes just to, pay that childcare, and that's not sustainable. I'm like, the average Texan and American can't survive. And look, these operators need to operate. They're small businesses, right? So you got to give them a little flexibility and some administrative relief in entry, and on the uh, just the administrative burden on that front, right? The licensing component is obviously a burdensome. I mean, rightfully so. You're dealing with children, right? So, and these are our most precious commodities. So, I would just continue this fight. I think it will. I think a lot more people are paying attention, just from discussions on the floor with members, and even in the committees. I think they want to do the right thing, and it's just making sure we carve out our space in that.
Yeah.
And it's there. The windows are open.
The windows are open,
Yeah.
and You're talking about burdens, right? The early childhood education system is not simple. And as we just
Yeah.
saw Kim, one of her slides, it touches, 6 different agencies. And
Correct.
for the first time, one of the things that the legislature did address was governance. And we've never really had a holistic conversation about it. And to your point, every parent, every Texan wants to make sure that children are safe and that they're getting quality education. If it's early childhood education, public education, but it can be complex. And for the first time, we're going to be talking about governance. So we have the governor's task force on early childhood education established a quad agency that will look at the 4 state agencies, and then also the sunset process is coming up, that will be
Right.
reviewing some of those key agencies that are involved in early childhood education. So we want our children to be protected, but at the same time, we want streamlined
Yes.
communication, right? We want efficiencies. We want childcare providers to be able to take care of kids and not just solely paperwork, but focusing on what matters. How do you see the interim and the upcoming session around governance? And what is your advice for folks on how to engage? Because it's going to be complicated. I'm sure it's going to be messy. Any advice on
Well,
that?
you've been around, and many of you guys have been around a long time. And for folks that on the advocacy part of it, the interim charges are very important. Getting, once those requests come in for these committees to meet, what do we want to discuss? And then obviously the sunset part of it with Texas Workforce Commission. I'm sitting currently sit in a good position to advocate, being the subcommittee chair on their funding. So they at least listen to me and return phone calls. So um, it's just vitally important that this interim right now, we get these as interim charges, particularly on the administrative side, on streamlining the licensure component, because you're right, 4 or 5 different agencies and whatever local occupancy codes and whatnot that you might have to um, um, go through. But I would encourage you guys to invite members to come out to a licensed care facility. And I'm sure y'all have. I mean, I've gone to the ones in my district and get a better understanding from their perspective. Because one side is the operator side, and then the other side is the administrative side. And as you mentioned, the paperwork. And it's just all encompassing, but y'all are doing a great job of keeping it on the forefront. And I'll be your advocate on that front as well.
Yes, thank you. And I know that there are some childcare providers here, and it's complicated and a lot of people don't understand. So I encourage, just as the chairman said, as they're looking at governance, to reach out to them and help them explain to them, help them understand so that the good decisions are made. There can always be great intent, and then it's like, what just happened? The intent was
Right.
there, but how can we do it? So I just want to thank you, Chairman, for being such a champion for children. I know you have a lot going on, and going from one place to another, but truly appreciate you. And I know that your door is always open for children. And if people have questions or need anything, you're willing to help. I know you've got to go. Any last words you'd like to share, or anything
Well,
we
just
can do?
just to give, I mean, I don't want to end on a bad note, right? But I do want to clarify, because I think what the $100 million was very, very important. But talking to TWC, we understand that we may not help as many kids, due to some issues that they're having at TWC nationally, at the national level. So we anticipated, helping, thousands more kids, and we've been informed that they might not be as much as we anticipated. But I mean, they're still going to get help. But my goal is to work with TWC and get the right data, get the right information so that we can make, as you mentioned, make the right decisions on some things. And childcare will be one of those. Workforce will be one of those. And as we go through the sunset process, it's unpredictable what happens at the federal level, and that's kind of also a challenge for us. But just know that our shop will be attuned to what's going on, and we just appreciate you guys the opportunity to address the group and the panel, and thanks to you guys, and
Well, thank you.
we're here.
And great point, because most of the dollars are federal, right? And
Correct.
so right now they're on recess, but budgets are being made. The majority of dollars for subsidized childcare are federal. So it's important to focus at the state level and also the federal. So thank you very
Cool.
much. I appreciate
Thank y'all. Take care.
All right, Mandy, thanks for that conversation with Representative Wally. And I think you've got a couple of data points to share with us about what happened at the Ledge.
Yeah, so just wanted to do a quick recap on what passed last session. It was exciting to have Chairman Wally join us and share some insight. As I mentioned, historically, Texas has focused on data and transparency, making sure that we improve quality. And this session was really about access and governance and investment. So very briefly, we've talked about the $100 million for the child care services, and the intent was really to try to reduce the wait list, which is between, I think, 80,000, 90,000 children on the wait list. So trying to reduce that, increase access. There was also $90 million put into the early education allotment, focusing on pre-K and pre-K partnerships, which will be interesting, trying to help an early education system so that it's not just childcare providers and public school, but that we have a system working for our kids. Next slide, please. Kim, I know, mentioned and shared some data points around childcare deserts. Reality is that Texas has lost nearly 75,000 childcare seats in the last year. So we're making progress in some areas, but childcare providers are just struggling to keep doors open. We also have seen a 24% drop in childcare providers over the past few years. And so a couple of key pieces of legislation focused on family home childcare providers, and really trying to reduce some of those burdens or obstacles from childcare providers, home-based providers opening up. The state agencies provide clear guidelines through rules and regulations about quality and safety. And there were several communities that were superseding that and putting on more layers of red tape. And so now that will not be able to happen. It's state agencies that use their quality measures and safety measures that will guide family home-based providers. So hoping that that will help us increase the number. Also, we also know around flexible reimbursement rates. I had one more I'm going to talk about real quick. In regards to childcare deserts, we mentioned that several people are not able to keep their doors open, mainly because their reimbursement rates are not to their highest level, because they're in low-income communities and their tuition rates are low, so their reimbursement rates are lower than if you were in another neighborhood, when really quality should matter. So legislation was passed that local workforce boards have flexibility to reimburse at that standard established rate, which I think is going to hopefully help lots of childcare providers. Next one, thanks. In regards to the early childhood education workforce, legislation was passed that will prioritize children of eligible childcare workers on the subsidized wait list. This is huge because we know that around half of the early education workforce qualify for one public benefit, and so are often struggling their own to be able to have childcare for their kids. So they'll now be on the priority list, and hopefully that's helping children as well as the early childhood education workforce. In regards to access, there is a lot of conversations with employers and the business community. Legislation was passed to create kind of a one-stop shop or a resource that would allow employers to log in or to go to and share resources and information with their employees who are parents to try to help them access childcare. And then I often say, Texas, we are data rich and information poor. Childcare, early childhood education is extremely complex, and we have a lot of data and a lot of different agencies, and legislation was passed to strengthen an early childhood integrated data system. So more streamlining so that there could be more efficiencies and conversations there. And then there's governance, as we mentioned. So, three key things, as we mentioned, was governor's task force, and they're going to be looking at governance of early childhood education and care, and they're looking at the coordination, accountability, and outcomes. There's also the quad agency that will be getting set up, and that's with TWC, Health and Human Service Commission, Department of Family Protective Services, and TEA. And that's looking at how can they better collaborate and coordinate policies, really streamlining in regulations. And then we are going to have the Sunset Review Commission. And many folks might not be familiar with this, but it's a state agency, goes under review every 12 years. And it just so happens that this round, we have the Department of Family Protective Services, that does the licensing, Health and Human Service Commission, DSHS, TWC, all going under review. And so this is a great opportunity to look at what are the efficiencies, what are the obstacles. The Sunset Commission does not set up a framework to talk about funding, but more about rules and regulations. And so what are those best practices and how can we better support our early childhood education industry practice as well as the children and families? Next slide. So just to wrap up, interim engagement opportunities, there is the Sunset Commission. I believe that the Sunset Commission should be appointed in the near future, sometime in the early fall, if all goes according. Those are the agencies. The state agencies also have to do a self-evaluation, so they're doing that right now. And we'll be turning it in. There's the quad agency, the governor's task force, and as Chairman Wally mentioned, interim charges. If you're not familiar with interim charges, this is an opportunity to have committees who oversee childcare study the issue, right? The more they understand, the more they're familiar with, the more likely it is to become a priority next session, or the more likely they become an advocate or even file legislation. So encourage folks to engage in all these various areas. Please reach out if you have any questions. We would love to work with you. And with that, Kim, I'll hand it back to you.
Well, and Mandy, I was just going to say on that last slide that, you could see it looked like a little more alphabet soup, with all the names of all those different agencies. But, Texas Workforce Commission is in all four of those buckets. Health and Human Services in all four of those buckets. And then everybody but the Department of Ag, who's just in the regular interim charges one, the rest of them are in three of those buckets. So there's lots of opportunities to talk about how to best serve children and families multiple ways and multiple state agencies. So so the next 17 months will be interesting. So thank you, Mandy. Thank you for your conversation with Representative Wally. The information you guys share is always insightful, and without your leadership, we would be lost. So thank you for your continued work. So, all right. So we are now going to take a little bit of a zoom out and talk a bit about childcare from the national perspective and why everyone should be invested in solving childcare. We are going to be joined now by Elliot Haspel. Elliot is a nationally recognized family policy expert and commentator with a specialty in childcare issues. He is the author of Crawling Behind America's Childcare Crisis and How to Fix It. And then the newly released book, as in newly released this week, the Raising a Nation, 10 Reasons Every American Has a Stake in Child Care for All, in addition to many other policy reports, and the author of Substack, The Family Frontier. Elliot, it is so good to have you with us this morning. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here.
So let's jump in. Why this book and why now?
Yeah, so I have been sort of fairly obsessed with this idea of how do we actually win the childcare system that all families, kids, childcare educators, communities deserve. And part of my analysis is that we've made a lot of progress. I mean, you all in Texas are, coming to you from Colorado. Texas is a great example of progress, new attention. You heard from Representative Wally. This has been something that's been building for years and years. And yet, I think to really make that leap from these, gains we've made to the gains we're going to need to see, that we've skipped this step of making deep values-based arguments that childcare truly should be considered more of a right. It should be considered an essential part of our social fabric. It should not be just thought of as a private individual or family responsibility. While families certainly have primary role in caring for their kids, we want to make sure that every family has access to the care that they need to be able to raise their kids the way they want to raise them. So in that way, government can come alongside families to support families.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Um, so you spend a lot of time in the book telling us how we got here, how our childcare system could be different after World War II. In the 1970s, we had an opportunity to change. But you also say that childcare is in its infancy. So give us a little of that history, and yet we are still early on in this fight of creating this comprehensive, affordable, quality, high quality childcare program system.
Yeah, so I think it's important to compare, I think, sometimes childcare to, for example, public education, right? Public schools in this country have existed for 175 years. It's enshrined in every state constitution, including the Texas Constitution, right? It is part. Thomas Jefferson was writing about public schools. Like, it is just seen as you're not going to have a good democracy, you're not going to have a good republic if you don't have some form of strong public education. Childcare is much more recent. So while there's always been need for childcare, there's always been women working and mothers working in this country, especially lower income women, and obviously in the antebellum South, enslaved girls and women were working. The sort of more modern system of we have vast numbers of families that have all of their available parents in the workforce. We don't live in multi-generational homes anymore for the most part. We've experienced sort of this mass urbanization. All of those forces really start to collide around the 1960s and 1970s. And so what's interesting is we've had these sort of moments throughout American history. You mentioned during World War II, some of you probably know that story. Temporarily, the government set up child care programs so that the Rosie the Riveters could go and work in the factories. That went away afterwards. But really, this pivotal moment in 1971. I'll very quickly tell the story because I don't think you can understand American child care without understanding 1971.
Great.
There's this bill called the Comprehensive Child Development Act, and it would have started to fund a nationally funded, locally administered network of child care programs, the easiest way to describe it. It passed both houses of Congress on a bipartisan basis. It ended up on Richard Nixon's desk. Nixon had come into office talking about this bill, so it really looked like this was going to happen. But it was sort of a fraught moment in American history. Nixon was dealing with kind of a rebellion on his right flank over some of his engagement with China. And Pat Buchanan and some of the other sort of strongly conservative advisors got in his ear and basically convinced Nixon to veto this bill. But he vetoes it in incredibly strong language. He says, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, that to do this would be committing the moral authority of the federal government over that of the family. Now, again, this bill did nothing but create voluntary access to child care programs that would have been affordable, but that was the line. It got into the water pretty heavily, and to the point that when this bill, even a watered down bill version of this bill, came up a couple years later, there was a flyer that started going all around the country, like chain letter style, saying that it was going to let kids sue their parents if the parents asked them to take out the trash or go to church. I'm not kidding you. To the point that Walter Mondale, who was one of the sponsors of this bill, had to hire 2 staffers just to deal with the volume of mail he got opposing this legislation. And so that was really this turn, right? So government here, family there, never the twain shall meet. It's actually a problem if they get close to each other. But the issue is we still had, and then this shift of the economy, right? There was no longer sort of a one income family, it wasn't working anymore. all of these, mothers of young children were flooding into the workforce, and to the point that you have half of mothers of young children by 1975 in the workforce. There's no childcare system for them there. What is there is the free market, and so you really start to get very expensive, right? Like programs that have not paying their staff very well because the economics doesn't work, right? Childcare doesn't actually work as a market good, but that's all we had, and to this day, we live with that legacy.
Well, that every time I think about 1971, and for the record, I was not born yet. We were so close. We were so close to having a completely different system, and then how much it has set us back over the years is mind-boggling. And yet we are still here. We are still fighting, and we still have an opportunity to make that change. In your book, you make a case that is for a comprehensive childcare system in 10 different ways, perspective, values. We're not going to go over all 10. You'll have to read the book to get all of those. But I do want to hit you with a few. We live in Texas. Our Child Care Development Block Grant goes to the Texas Workforce Commission. So we are very rich and very easy for us to make that workforce economic development. Why invest in childcare? It's because it's, helps the economic development, helps the workforce zone. And you talk about that in the book. But you also really encourage us to broaden our language and broaden the ways we talk about childcare. So why is it important to talk about it not just as a workforce and economic benefit?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so I want to be clear up front. I think the economic argument is entirely valid and it is an important tool in the toolbox. Let's start there. I think it can be limiting, though, because the idea of attaching a parent to the labor force is not transcendent. There's not really a value to it. And I'll draw one more time on our example to the schools, right? Schools serve a child care function. If anyone doesn't think that's true, then they didn't have a kindergartner like I did in 2020 who had to go through Zoom school, right? Like schools serve a child care function. However, again, it is not the reason, not the primary reason we spend so much money, public money on child care, on public schools. The reason it's in our constitutions, the reason that, it's free for everyone, regardless of whether or not they could pay. Is because we see a deeper value set to it. And so my challenge is that if you focus or overly foreground the economic argument, it only gets you so far. Because to actually put in the amount of money you need year after year for a system that's going to really work for everyone, it's going to require a larger argument. I sometimes liken this to you can open a door by you can elbow it open or use your shoulder, and you will open it. You will get some access you didn't have before, but you might break the door and you might hurt yourself on the way. So I think we need to be a little careful with it because there's so much more than childcare means. What it means to communities and families. A couple of examples I give in the book, right? Like childcare programs have been shown to be vital sources of social connectivity for new parents, right? Those first months and years of being a new parent is head spinning, and it can be really isolating. There's research showing childcare programs facilitate friendships, they facilitate social networks, they facilitate sort of these people who become kind of your village in a way, especially if you don't have a lot of family around. The childcare providers themselves become important sources of information. All of that lowers parental stress, it increases the family flourishing. That's really important. That has nothing to do with attaching a parent to a workforce, to their job. Another example I would give, is things like faith communities. The ability to be able to, go to, if you're a person of faith that go to a church or a mosque or a synagogue that requires that, you have certain capacities in your life. And if you and your spouse are working laddered shifts, like back-to-back shifts, one is you're working during the day, one is you're working during the night, just to try to deal with childcare, like that is actually having a really negative impact on your overall family functioning. And again, it's not just about what does that mean for the GDP, what does that mean for business productivity? It's all about like what does this truly mean? The last example I'll give, a state like Texas, lots of rural areas, right? The ability to have childcare is often the determining factor in whether a family with young children stays in a rural community or not. And it's actually fascinating, and I talk about some of these examples in the book. you see conservative small towns in Colorado, in Nebraska, in northern Minnesota that are taxing themselves or otherwise saying we're going to get involved in starting a childcare program or otherwise supporting childcare. Again, not because we so much care about the, factory in town having a worker that's going to be there the next day, but because we're not going to exist in 25 years if we don't do something about it now. So those are just some examples, but I think we have to broaden the toolbox. Everyone has values, everyone has morals. They're not all the same. We have to be able to meet people where they're at. So the economic argument is great. It will get some people to sit up and take notice that would never otherwise do it. But for some people, it's not going to. And I think we need to be able to marshal a lot of different values-laden arguments if we're going to get where we need to go.
I think that is, it's so wise, and you're right. We do have we talk about rural communities here in Texas a lot, because we have a lot of them. As a small town girl myself, they hold a special place in my heart. But you also make an argument in the book about that childcare actually helps stay-at-home parents,
Yeah.
and family choices that way. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so that's something that I think is really important, actually. Sometimes we carve up childcare a little bit to ways that are unhelpful to my mind. Like whether it's a stay-at-home parent or a family friend, neighbor, caregiver, or your licensed program, like you're providing vitally important childcare. So I've done some work with my think tank Capita doing research on stay-at-home parents, and it's fascinating to find a lot of them tell you they need childcare. Because guess what? They need to go to the doctor. They have another kid who needs to go to the doctor. They would like to just like be able to go and sit in a coffee shop for like an hour, right? And like not have small humans demanding things from them. And that's totally fine. But there's also a ton of isolation among stay-at-home parents. There's a lot of them who don't have access to the care that they need. And when they're looking particularly for, in our very sort of scarcity system, a lot of the types of care that they need aren't accessible. Part-time care, drop-in care. We do not have a lot of that in this country.
Right,
Partially it's because of how we fund it, right? So yes, I think that's one thing. There are also plenty of stay-at-home parents who would like to work more, who can't because they can't access childcare. And I will tell you on the other side, there are a number of people in the workforce who would like to work less and would like to spend more time at home with their kids, but who can't because we don't have any way in this country of really supporting stay-at-home parents. Other countries do this. Many other countries offer, for example, versions of what are called home care stipends, which is literally, we'll just pay you like while your kid is very young, 1 or 2, like you can choose to get a stipend to care for them. Or a couple states in the U.S. have from time to time put in programs in place where for the kids who are under the age of 1, if you qualify for childcare subsidy, you can pay yourself with that subsidy to take care of the kids. So there are precedents for this. And I actually think when we broaden the tent, and again, it's values. If the value is all parents get access to the care they need to raise their kids the way they want to raise them and parent the way they want to parent, that gets you to a very different place than if the value is just like we want, X percentage of people having access to childcare subsidy, or we want Y percentage of, slots in the state. Those are necessary inputs. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But like it's not the reason we do it. That is a benchmark along the way.
Right. I think about you mentioned other countries, and thinking about how many other countries. I think we're one of a handful of countries that don't have a federally paid parent leave program. So we talk about our infants and toddler care, and how important that is too. So it's again, it's the choices we're making.
That's right. It's us, Papua New Guinea, and a bunch of tiny Pacific islands.
Right. And that's a weird group for us to be in.
Yes.
So we know, and you talked a little bit about this already, but we in the ECE space, and I've been in the space for my entire career. We can get into some turf wars between us, childcare centers, and the public schools, and our current business model like that you've talked about. But you said ECE, to quote you, ECE field is far more open to evolution than our K-12 space. Talk a little bit about that possible evolution, and how do we get that started?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. And again, that's the history, right? 175 years of public education and administrative kludge and all, right? It just naturally it sort of buckles under its own weight. We're not that the system is not that well developed in EC. So I think a couple of things in terms of the evolution. One is I think we have to figure out what is the vision and what is the goals. So depending where you're headed will necessarily, you will back out different policy decisions. So here's a great example. Are we talking about early care and education? Are we talking about 0 to 5, 0 to 3, or are we talking about school-age childcare as well? So there's a great paper that a colleague of mine, Catherine Ann Edwards, put out recently, and we can maybe drop a link in the chat, which he argues for essentially, what if you just created a child development system, which she calls it, surrounding the public school system? So you have K-12, and that's the school year, school day, and surrounding it is everything that is before school, before you hit the mandatory age of school entry, and outside of the school year and the school day. So after school, summer care, or infant toddler care, pre-K, all of that together in one unified system. So instead of saying like, we're going to fund this differently, we're going to have different governance, we're just going to say all of this supports child development, all of this supports family functioning and family flourishing. And so that's an interesting reframe. It's much harder for like the K-12 system to try to reframe anything. But I think we still have the opportunity to do that. I think, one thing we're still reckoning with, Kim, is like this, like take pre-K, right? Like that is a tension. Like there were very intentional decisions made for understandable reasons in like 2000s to like say, we're going to push pre-K as part of the public education system, as part of it is education. The shadow side of that is if you say that's education, then what's everything else? Right? Like that, like
Right.
reinforce, is it just babysitting? Is it not important? And so I think we have a chance here in 2025 and beyond, and particularly in states like Texas, I think, which are just think about what's the system every Texan family needs. Start there. Start with the family, because the family doesn't experience those needs differently. From that time, that kid, they have a 2-year-old, and if you have a 7-year-old, like you've got like a lot of different needs, and you're not like, well, I want my, childcare subsidy here, my pre-K there, and my, after school program there, and my summer. It's not good for families. So I think if we center families and ask those big vision questions, we will back out the policy agenda that we need.
Yeah. I know it's as we're approaching this interim and all these governance opportunities that we have to improve our system, it's with who do we have in mind, right? For the center, that it's the children and families as the end users. But I want to turn our attention a little bit to the role of employers. Many of us think that business leaders are new to this conversation, new partners, but really they've been part of this conversation since the late 80s and probably even before that. And in your book, you give the Vermont example of business leaders stepping up to the plate. And we are in Texas. We are a long way from Vermont, both physically, both size, as well as politically. We are a long way from Vermont, and we recognize that. But I think it's important to think about what other states are doing in other models. So first, explain what Vermont did, and how business leaders can help explore and really think about childcare.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And yes, I agree. I think probably the population of Vermont could fit in this room.
Right, exactly. In my back pocket, I like to say.
Exactly. With all love to our friends in Vermont. But what Vermont did, essentially, they had a bill coming forward. It was called Act 76. They were trying to raise $120 million a year to be able to expand the childcare supply and massively expand who would be eligible for childcare assistance, to include middle class and even some other upper middle class families. $120 million a year may not sound like transformative to Texas, because, well, it's a lot for you, but still for Vermont with their 5 people, that's actually an enormous amount of money. But the way they came up with the pay for it was potentially to do a payroll tax that was under consideration, a small 0.44% payroll tax, most of which would be borne by the employers. And you had the Vermont Finance Committee essentially had this hearing, and it was one of the most fascinating hearings I've ever heard. You can find it on YouTube. It's boring, but I find it fascinating. What you had is business leader after business leader after business leader after business leader coming before the Vermont legislature and saying, tax us. Like, this is what you need to do it, and we're going to give you air cover. We're not going to come after you. We're not actually going to go out there and we will sell this, because a couple of different reasons. Like, one, we understand this is important not just for our employees, but for our entire community. 2, frankly, we don't want to solve this ourselves, because that sounds like a headache, right? There's some of the arguments that people were making. It's like, so this doesn't seem like a great idea for us to do. And then 3, like in that state in particular, they're like, the economic and social implications, particularly in an aging state like Vermont, like it was huge. So they came forward and said that And the Vermont legislature went ahead and passed it. And I will tell you, it has been stunningly successful. They've covered large percentages more of their families. They've opened, I think it's 90, again, this is Vermont, so use like, or magnify this by like 100 for Texas. They've opened like 90 new programs, including to what your data points before. Most of those are family child care homes, interestingly, and a lot of them in rural areas that were struggling as a result of the funding. So it's been really successful. So I think, I never begrudge any company or corporation that wants to try to do right by its employees. My contention is that we cannot ask the private sector to solve childcare. A, it's not scalable. There's just not enough, and small businesses can't handle it. B, we don't run rights through the employer-employee relationship. It is just not, it's not sustainable as a way to do it. But that being said, like, businesses are massively important in terms of their ability to generate the political influence and help to generate that change. So I think that's something that I am always encouraging is, like, when you're talking to business folks about childcare, like, always, always, always be making the case that they need to be using public advocacy for solutions. And the last thing I'll say, which I find this useful sometimes, people have found it useful, we don't ask corporations to provide the third grade, right? We don't ask them to provide an on-site elementary school. We don't ask them to subsidize, for the most part, right? Their employees going to schools. What we ask them to do is contribute into a system that we're going to roll up tax dollars and make sure everyone has it, because the benefits ripple out so tremendously beyond just the users of those services. It's more than just the parent and the kid. I argue strongly, and there's a whole book, that the child care is absolutely in one of those types of services that have those positive social ripple effects, so that it deserves to be on that side of the ledger, as opposed to the idea of it just being a private individual responsibility to deal with.
Right, private company. I know. Maybe someday. We will keep fighting. You have charged us in the book to be citizen caregivers,
Yeah.
striving for policies and culture for every child and family that supports what they need and what they want. And we don't have a whole time to get into the whole conversation about the care economy, which has that conversation has erupted since COVID, which I find quite fascinating. But tell us about your vision of this citizen caregivers and how do we make that a reality?
Yeah, so this is I'm glad you brought it up. Like, there are big P policy changes that need to happen. There are also cultural changes that need to happen around how we think about care in this country. And in a lot of ways, politics, as the old saying goes, is downstreams of culture, right? And politics also shape culture, but it really is, in many cases, downstream of culture. And so if we embrace this idea that care is actually crucial to how we exist as neighbors, how we exist in community, as we exist as people in a state, and that it's actually not just, well, that parent had that kid, and so they need to deal with that kid. No, not in a way of saying that we're going to take over the child rearing, but a way of saying, like, it's actually like this relationship, like, we need kids, we need strong families. And so as citizens, whether or not we have kids, whether or not we have young kids, like, we're going to step up, like, we're going to make sure that we're doing things from small as greeting that family when they come into the cafe, or smiling at them in Target or Walmart when their kid's having a tantrum, to let them know it's okay and we're not like hating the fact that they're there. Like, there's literally like those
On
tiny
the
micro
airplane.
interactions
Yeah,
on
yeah.
the airplane, right? Like, we have to be, like, we all have a role in making a society and our communities more hospitable for families with young children, all the way to advocating and talking to our elected officials. Is actually something powerful about someone saying, I don't have a kid, or I don't have a young kid, right? I have no like immediate skin in this game. And like, look, like, I do care about having a strong community. I do care about having, a safe and healthy and prosperous community. And that means that, yeah, again, if you need to take my tax dollars, like, to make sure this happens, like, go for it. I'm going to vote for you. I'm going to get out there and like, so that's what I mean, citizen caregiver. It's almost a different ethic, a different way of showing up in community than we have traditionally shown.
Yeah. We as Americans, we're all very proud of our individualism, but at the same time, we are humans and we live in a community, right? So the more we have that. All right, I've got
Can
one
I
more question.
Can I tell
Yeah,
you
go
one
ahead.
fast? Wait, I know you want a question. There was recently a Gallup survey, I think it was like 2 months ago, and they surveyed all sorts of Americans, and they said, "What values do you hold the most?" And do you know what value dominated every single other one on every subgroup? Republicans, Democrats, Independents. It wasn't freedom, and it wasn't independence. Those were number 2 and 3. It was family. Family. Americans care about families, and if we lean in on that, I think we've got actually can cut through a lot of the noise.
Yep. Yep. I like that one. Well, and that's a great segue to our last question, because one of the things you talk about in the book is the values first, policy second.
Yeah.
And so as Texas approaches the sunset process, along with our governor's task force on governance, looking at regulations for streamlining the processes, what is your advice on how to lead with values and then work on policy?
Yeah, so there's a political communication specialist, Anatchenko Osorio, has this line, and I quote it everywhere because it is my favorite pithy saying about this, which is, "You got to sell the brownie and not the recipe." And we can get ourselves, and I'm bad at this. I try to like we can get ourselves caught up in selling the recipe. But the brownie of all of this, again, is not like a particular governance structure. It's not a particular percentage of families being able to access childcare subsidy. That's the recipe. You have to have a recipe to have a good brownie. The brownie, again, is families being able to live vibrant, happy, joyful lives, be able to pass on their traditions and their values and their stories to the next generation, to spend time with their neighbors, their loved ones, to engage in like all of that stuff. That's what the brownie is. And so I think when you think about these questions, I would just encourage you all to start at that level. Like, to what end does this governance structure get us? Because if what we're looking for, again, it really does matter. Because some people's answers, what we're looking for is as high labor, workforce participation as we can get. That will lead you to a certain set of things. Some people's answer is like, we really want families to be able to spend time with their kids. That will lead you to a certain number of things. Like, there's not one answer to this, but I
Right.
think start with that level, start with that layer of not what do we want, like what is the Texas we want to see? What should the experience be of a family who is having a child from the time that they, get pregnant through, those early years of life? Like what should that, and then what is the governance structures? What are the funding streams? What are the things that are needed in order to power that and make that happen? And that will get us a lot further than just starting at like the 1 or 2 layers below and focusing too much on the recipe.
I'm going to remember that one. The brownie versus the recipe. Team, do we have any, I think we've got time for maybe 1 or 2 questions from the audience. I don't know if there's any. I'm looking at my chat to see if there's anything that's coming up.
Kim,
No?
we do have one question. So someone is curious how they can support or create initiatives working on this wraparound school idea.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think I am positive, because I know some of the groups, right? There are enormous assets in Texas already, right? Groups that are thinking about this. So I think, it's everyone from campaigns to great level reading to like your early matters groups to children at risk, right? Like, and so I think part of the first thing would be sort of form some sort of table, right? And I think about who are the after school policy experts and advocates, who are the ones working on summer care issues, who are the ones working on the early care, and like, so forming a table and again saying like, all right, what's the vision here, what's our ultimate goal, and then like where are the points of alignment, the points of misalignment, because we get to some things cross that I don't think everyone understands. For example, very large proportion of child care and development block grant, because the child care subsidy goes to school-aged care actually.
Yep.
So that's not well understood. I think summer care is one, like I've always thought, I will tell you all, that is like kind of the lowest hanging fruit, and I don't know why every politician in America doesn't run and I'm going to fix some like summer camp, because I don't know about you all, if you've got school-aged kids, like, oh boy, it's snowing outside, it's the middle of December, it's time to spend $10,000 on trying to get my kids in summer camp. Oops, it's
That's right.
it's 6:02 a.m. It's all sold out.
Yep.
Right, like it's an but it's an entry point, right? And it's an entry point that expands the constituency of people who care about this. Because you can be like, well, you know what? Well, that is also terrible. You know what else is also terrible is when you have like a 2-year-old and you're trying to do it. So let's
Yep.
all move
Yep.
together. So that would be my answer. I think forming tables, finding places to. I believe strongly in the power of coalition, and I actually think Texas is probably as well set up as any state to move on that.
Elliot, thank you so much for your time, your insight, your knowledge, for writing this book. I know I will keep it nearby, especially when I'm thinking about messaging and thinking about how we can work with different elected officials and different decision makers, and how to get them across those finish lines as we think about it. So again, thank you, thank you, thank you. We look forward to talking to you soon, and appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank y'all for having me. Enjoy the rest of the summer.
You too. Thanks, Elliot. Wow, my head's full. And I think they dropped the link to the book to get that as well. So now we are going to be joined. We're going to zoom back in a little bit. We were at the national level. So we're going to look at a couple different states, Georgia and Arkansas. While we know Texas is unique in our size and our systems, taking a look, similar to how Elliot explained Vermont, to other states gives us an idea of how to improve ours. Amy Jacobs is the commissioner of Bright from the Start, which is in the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning. The agency is responsible for helping meet the early child care and education needs of hundreds of thousands of Georgia's children and their families. And Governor Nathan Daniel appointed her to lead that department since in June of 2014. So she's been on her job for a while. Tanya Williams serves as the Assistant Commissioner of the Office of Early Childhood. She has served in that role for more than 20 years and is responsible for overseeing child care licensing and regulatory checks, direct service and operations, content and professional development, and local leads, as well as several federal programs that serve young children and families. Amy and Tanya, thank you for being here. We're so glad that you are here and can join us today. Are your brains as full as mine is after listening to Elliot?
Yes.
So it was a good information. So Amy, I know Georgia went through a structural change several years ago now, and so you have lived in. So I'm gonna let you go first. Or Tanya, I know Arkansas is a little bit newer. So will you give us a little bit of a structure of your current ECE system in the state, how you got there, who helped you get across the finish line, and a little of your backstory?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Kim, and good afternoon from Georgia. I think it's still morning in Texas. So just a little bit about our history. You will hear me refer to DCAL. That's what we call ourselves these days. The Department of Early Care and Learning, we call ourselves DCAL. So we were created in 2004, and we claim ourselves as the very first state to kind of build this EC umbrella agency. We were created by our then governor, Sonny Perdue, and I think interesting fact, he was the first Republican governor in Georgia since Reconstruction. And we consider ourselves the state's birth to 5 early learning agency. And of course, we do have that school age piece. That consolidation, it was legislation, of course, heavily sponsored by our governor. It consolidated 3 entities. One was our child care licensing, which was part of our Department of Human Resources, which is our child welfare and our public assistance agency here in Georgia. Our Office of School Readiness, which administered our Georgia's pre-K program. And then we had a Georgia Child Care Council, which housed our quality initiatives and quality dollars from CCDF. We are a cabinet level agency. I report directly to the governor, and our governor does appoint an advisory board that we meet with on a quarterly basis. So DCAL is our state's CCDF agency. Of course, that includes our child care licensing and regulation, our quality improvement system, our child care subsidy program, workforce and professional development programs, and our Georgia's free universal pre-K program for 4-year-olds. We house our Head Start collaboration office, and we also administer 2 USDA nutrition programs, the CSEFP and the summer food program. We do not have any authority over home visiting or IDEA Part B or Part C. So just a couple reasons about why we were created back in 2004 when Governor Perdue came into office. At that point, we had had a very successful Georgia pre-K program. Our pre-K program began in 1992. I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of this section, more about our pre-K program. But it began in 1992. It expanded very quickly from 750 kids to over 70,000 kids right now. And the governor had seen the success of Georgia's pre-K on getting kids ready for kindergarten. He knew how important that was, and he wanted to extend and really infuse early education component into childcare. So, of course, moving away from the babysitting conversation to the early education conversation. And we had proven that with our pre-K program. And so that was really the main reason. At the same time, No Child Left Behind was being rolled out at the federal level, creating all of these additional standards for K through 12. And we knew we needed standards for birth to 5 that were aligned with those standards. And so we knew we needed an agency in which to do that. I believe we were the first state to have birth to 5 standards at that time that aligned directly with our K-12 standards. And then, of course, Governor Perdue was a Republican, as I mentioned, and he was all about administrative efficiency and cost savings. So there was a small cost savings, but it was also about better customer service for our child care programs. When you have all this across different agencies, it can get very confusing for child care programs. So that was really kind of the third reason for our creation and consolidation. I want to touch really briefly on our Georgia Pre-K program because it really is a foundation for everything we do. Again, created in 1992, where we started with 750 kids, and now we serve over 70,000 children. We have a dedicated funding source. The Georgia Lottery funds us, so that helps us to be successful. Where we have that dedicated funding source, our lottery can only be used for Georgia Pre-K or for our Hope Scholarship, which is our college merit-based scholarship. This is for 4-year-olds. It is universal. It is available all across our state in every county in Georgia. It is a mixed delivery model. So we would not be able to serve over 70,000 4-year-olds if we did not have this mixed delivery model. So about 50% of our classrooms are in public schools and 50% are in private childcare. And that partnership really works well for us in allowing us to serve as many kids as possible all across the state in different counties, rural, suburban, and urban. And of course, it has been successful and continues to be successful in getting kids ready for kindergarten. So that is us in a nutshell.
Thank you so much. It's so interesting to I guess I'm the nerd. Well, I think we're probably all nerds of the group, but going back to the history and really understanding how that all happens and gets you to that place. So Tanya, in Arkansas, you guys, this is relative. So you guys are still living through the transition. So tell us where you guys are at and how your structure is laid out.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. Thanks so much for allowing Arkansas to be a presenter here today. For those of you in Texas, we actually, like Georgia, had an office of early childhood, but it was called the Division of Child Care and Early Childhood Education within the Department of Human Services. And that had been in place for over almost 3 decades, which was fortunate. Most of the functions of early childhood was there: licensing, the child care block grant. We administer one of a few states that administer an early Head Start Child Care Partnership Grant at the state level, and from the state office, we have a preschool development grant. Prior to the move, we administered the child nutrition, but when we moved over to the department, that was moved within. And I think ours is really it came from the LEARNS Act in 2023, and it really was about trying to streamline the functions. We had moved Arkansas Better Chance, our state-funded pre-K, to the department several years earlier, and so it put it all back together within the Office of Early Childhood. But it was also to put nutrition, for example, with National School Lunch at the Department of Ed, which can feel a little bit weird for people in early childhood, but they're 2 floors down from us. And so we work very closely together. So there's still that connection to the child and adult care food program and summer feeding. And I think it's important to talk about what maybe isn't a part of our Office of Early Childhood at this point, the nutrition, but also Part B and Part C, like Georgia, that is within the Department of Ed, but it's within federal programs and special ed. So we equally work very closely with them. I think it was also because we already had a lot of that infrastructure in place. The LEARNS Act, I think, was more about really lifting up that early childhood is about brain development and about the connection to education. We always thought of ourselves as education, even when we were at DHS. But I do think it's sort of, we call it like we've grown up. We've gone to big school. We're at big school now with the Department of Ed. And I think I heard Elliot talk about this. I'm not so sure that it matters where people sit in terms of governance. I think it really matters what the focus is. And so I tell my staff, the focus hasn't changed for us. The focus has always been about children and the families we serve and that experience. So, but it does help us align. We've always had aligned early learning standards, but it can help us all with more focus and intentionality with our K-12 partners, make sure that as we're moving children through that whole education process from birth really through secondary, that we're in alignment together and not having to work across, in a different agency. So that's really Arkansas' story. We have organizationally and physically moved over to the department in the past 2 years. Our governance structure is, we report to the State Board of Education. We always had reported on state-funded pre-K, so we've always had a great partnership there. But now we really take everything to our Board of Education. We do have an early childhood commission that is in the law that was in place for many, many years. It is a advisory only, but it is membership that's appointed by the governor and our legislative body.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Tanya. So for both, and this question's for both of you. As and one of the things that we deal with in Texas, which is not unique, we've got the pre-K standards that are, that govern and give guidelines to all of our public school pre-K. We've got minimum standards for childcare licensing. We've got the QRIS system for which is in Texas Rising Star for our childcare providers. And, so how as you guys have merged and consolidated, how did you get through some of that stuff as well as technology and data and like you think all those things oh, that's easy, we'll figure them out. Not necessarily, right? Those are big conversations. So talk to us about that process and how you got people all on one page. Amy, do you want to start?
Sure. So I think when you think about specifically IT systems, since we were created over 20 years ago, we didn't really have any fancy IT systems that we had to figure out how, that they talk to each other. So that was a benefit. Of course, we were able to start from the ground up and build the type of system that we needed, which foundationally was with our childcare licensing, but then we're able to build our quality rated and our pre-K and everything kind of is in one comprehensive system, not perfectly. But that was kind of one benefit of 20 years ago. We didn't have that systems that we had to figure out how to talk to each other. But I think when you talk about processes and standards and things like that, it makes it so much easier because you have the people and the relationships just under one roof and you have to work together. And I also think, and we have one strategic plan that guides everything that we do. So we know when we have those questions that come up, we're all working towards that same vision and that same mission. So there's no question. So that's really helpful in Georgia.
Great, thank you. Amy or Tanya, I know yours is a little more raw.
Yeah. So I feel very lucky that Arkansas had a lot of systems in place in terms of technology that already talk to each other. It is a challenge to lift technology from one agency to another. So for those of you who are thinking about new structures, make sure you spend a lot of time and attention to that little detail. My primary concern about everything that we do, because everything we have in place is automated. My licensing staff have used a tablet for two decades. Like they go out in the field and there's not paper. We say we're pretty automated here. We don't do paper in the Office of Early Childhood. Our school readiness assistance or child care development block grant connects to our licensing system. And so providers can go in and bill, they can set themselves up as a provider. All of that's linked together. Their payments connected to the state payment system. So, but transferring it from one agency to the other, it can be challenging. And so for me, the biggest thing was making sure our providers had payment, because we've heard about the really fragile nature of how our world operates. And that was the thing that I said over and over during this transition is we have to make sure that payments are timely. These people, unlike, and not to say schools have loads of money, I'm not implying that, but their cash flow or their flow is so very different than it is in early childhood. So that was one of the primary things. It was a little bumpy. I'm not going to lie. It was a little bumpy. But we've worked out a lot of those little details. But we were very fortunate to have some of those systems in place. We have built a new school readiness assistant system for the child care block grant since we've been over here and stood up very quickly in those 2 years. Most IT bills in early childhood for me have lasted much longer than that. So I will say we moved swiftly. It's been a pretty smooth transition, a little bumpy, but pretty smooth. But it continues that whole automation for the providers, but it also created a portal for families. And before, the families were going online, submitting an application that had been in paper before. So it really brought that model to a much more modernized platform in terms of technology. And I think a much better user feel for both families and providers and for the staff here in the Office of Early Childhood.
That's awesome. Great. Quick question for you, Amy. With your Georgia Universal Pre-K program, how do you guys, and you're in this mixed delivery model, how do you handle special ed and bilingual education that are typically in the public school sector with those private pay or private childcare companies that are providers? That's the word I want.
Yeah. So I would say, obviously, we have a great partnership at the state level with our Department of Education. So we're kind of building that system level thinking on how we work with special education and dual language learners. But it really, I think, happens more at the local level. We have pre-K specialists that work directly for DCAL that are assigned all throughout the state in their local communities. And they have built incredible relationships between our pre-K classes in the local school system and child care providers. So if we have a child that needs those type of services, they're going to help put that child where he or she will get the best services depending on the teacher and the resources that are available. It's not a competition. It's taken a long time, but it's not a competition. We also have inclusion classes in our Georgia Pre-K model, which are smaller class sizes. Of course, they're inclusion classes, so you've got children with different abilities. And those look different in different communities. A lot of times, of course, it will be a special education class specifically in your public school system, or depending on the area, the public school system will send a teacher to a child care program, and they will be there for half a day, a full day, or the students go back and forth between the private child care classroom to the public school. So it just depends at the community level. There are lots of different models for that. And then we also, for the dual language learners, we actually started a summer transition program where we have a rising pre-K program. So specifically for dual language learners, we know that they need that extra 6 weeks before pre-K even starts. And so we will serve them in our summer transition program, which is smaller than a regular pre-K classroom. And it also has that bilingual teacher. So those are just a couple ways that we do that.
Perfect. Thank you. That's helpful. So I've got 2 more questions for each of you. So the first question is, thinking about the transition, knowing not everything is perfect and everything goes smoothly, what are 1 or 2 things that you could have done better or still working on to improve? And then, so I'll have each of you answer that one. And then the second question is, what did you get right and what's positive? Because we want to end on a positive note. So, Amy, do you want to go first on what you could have done better or still working on improving?
I think 2 things. One, it's a big culture shift in my opinion, and I think that even 21 years later, we're still dealing with moving from the public assistance regulatory mindset to the early education mindset. We've done a good job, but it takes a lot longer than you think it's going to take. So give yourself some grace in that. And I also think if states are thinking about this consolidation under one roof, you don't have to do it all at one time. We did it in phases. For many different reasons. The political will wasn't there to move some of the things all at one time. There's, obviously a battle for money. And so we did it in phases. And I think that was really, really helpful. It gave us a minute to get things right, to communicate and do that change management, which you really need with your staff, in my opinion. So I think it's okay if you take some time and move pieces of the department gradually.
Yeah, that's good advice. Tanya?
Yeah, I think I hear this saying a lot, don't overthink things, but I would say overthink communication in this space. I cannot, you have to spend a lot of time on the communication. And I think to my colleague's point, especially with providers, because if you think about moving from that model of maybe public assistance to education, immediately there's a fear in the private community-based sector that public schools, school districts are going to take over everything. So I would say spend a lot of time on communication. That is definitely not a plan here in Arkansas. And the law and the governor have made that very clear in the LEARNS Act. There is, a protection. We need all the providers, including schools, including community-based, including faith-based. So, and childcare family homes, as many states, and what we've talked about today with the loss of so many of our homes, trying to make sure we have a network set up for that. So all of the providers are very important, but I think that communication is really important. And then understanding that there is always this need to work back across with other agencies. You have to make sure you're thinking about that, because we have to work with foster care at DHS, and we have to work with the fire department and health department on licensing regulations for safety, TANF. I mean, it just goes on and on. So you're always going to be working back across with, other agencies, and you have to think about that in your planning.
That's awesome. All right, positive things. Couple of from each of you. Amy?
Yeah, so I would think, creating the decal has definitely helped us do exactly what our governor at that time wanted to do, to increase the quality and really bring more emphasis on that early education component to childcare. We would not be able to do and been successful with our quality rated program and increased professional development, all those things. But I think one other positive thing that came out of it is, as I said, we do not house Part B, Part C, or home visiting. But DECAL has really become the convener and the collaborator of all things early learning. And so, of course, we continue to work across all of the other agencies and entities that serve this young population, but we've kind of become the convener and the collaborator because we have so many things under one roof, and it's helped move things along in our state very well.
Wonderful. And Tanya?
Yeah, I mean, I would say probably the technology that was in place. We have a forward-facing search engine for childcare that we were able to just make some tweaks to as a part of the LEARNS Act, but it was already there. And it shows so many things that families, communities can access that and see. And it has all childcare, including school age. Like, we think all of it's important, Head Start, school district. So it also has early intervention programs. So I think that was something that I'm really proud of that we had. And we also had in place this focus on quality. We're a big fan of Georgia. We always use Georgia so I'm kind of glad we went 20 years later so that we had time to get some of these things in place before we transition. But I think having that quality rating and improvement system in place, and we require all of our publicly funded programs to participate in that.
Thank you, ladies, for your time and your expertise, your dedication that you not only provided to us today, but for what you do in your states for young children and their families and childcare providers and professionals across the South. We are glad to be partners with you. So thank you for your time and your expertise.
Thanks.
Okay. You're welcome. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to turn over. I'm going to quit talking. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Lynn Lucas. Lynn is our Associate Director of Early Childhood Education here at Children at Risk, and she's going to have a great conversation with Libby and Rochelle.
Thank you so much, Kim. I am thrilled to introduce Dr. Libby Saunier. She has served as the CEO of the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children since 2019. Recognized for her tenacity and deep commitment to children, Dr. Saunier has led teams in system-wide initiatives for the betterment of children, families, and caregivers and practitioners for more than 2 decades. And Rochelle Wilcox is a seasoned leader in early childhood education with over 26 years of experience dedicated to advocacy, innovation, and impact. Her journey began in the classroom as a teacher and has since propelled her to her current role as the CEO and Executive Director of Wilcox Academy for Early Learning, which operates 3 centers. She also is a co-founder of For Providers by Providers. Welcome to you both, Libby and Rochelle. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
We're so glad to have you both here. And I know you two really are a dynamic duo. So let's start with Libby. If you can tell us a little bit about the work that you've done at the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children and how that work is intersected with the work that Rochelle's doing.
Sure. So the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization squarely focused on children birth through age 4. My joke, but I'm also serious, is once you hit 5, you're geriatric to us. So our mission is really narrow and deep, and we do what we're really known for is our work related to early learning. And through that work, we've been able to help establish an early childhood education fund that offers a dollar for dollar match for locals that raise $1 to increase access. We've been able to start an early childhood commission. You know, 6 years ago, we had no state funding going into early learning outside of our 4-year-old program. And now we have 77 million with a host of other things. And our work really intersects with Rochelle. One, you have to know Rochelle and I have known each other for more years than we can count. And I've been in all kinds of different roles, and she's always been in the fabulous space related to making sure our little people are getting what they need. And through our combined effort, we formed an initiative called Go Far Louisiana, and that's spelled GEAUX. And it's that proverb, if you want to go fast, you go alone, but if you want to go far, you go together. And so Rochelle and I are the co-chairs of that, amongst many other things in life together, but really making sure that as we're thinking about smart policies and leading with research and data, that right up there, equally as important too, is making sure we're talking to providers and families that are impacted by the system. So we're not going to propose some bougie, fancy policy work without having a conversation with Rochelle and her team and other providers, or she's coming to us to say, we got to fix XYZ because they understand it more intimately. Because I've never run a childcare center. I could do other things, but I don't know how to do that. And so having that ability to really have a lot of trust. We're both bulldozers in our own ways. And to be able to do that for the betterment of children in our state is a joy every day.
So that first off, I love that, you know, that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go, you know, go together. That's a wonderful takeaway alone. Rochelle, tell us a little bit about what, first off, and running 3 centers, I'm like that alone, and you do so much more. So I'm amazed by you. Tell us a little bit about what inspired you to do this work, and from your perspective, how your work intersects with what Libby does.
Sure. So what inspired me to do this work, period, starting with early care and education, is at the end of the day, our children deserve the best that we can offer them. And I wanted to be able to serve the children of my community, making sure that even though funding is always an issue, we're doing everything that we can to make sure that they get the best within those first 1,000 days. We know that brain development is at its highest during those first 1,000 days, and children need to be cared for by people that reflect them and represent them and is going to fight for them. And I was a young parent who brought my little people to school with me while I was in college, and also just needed the community. I was a Head Start child, and my youngest children, my older children, they're old now, but they were Head Start children. And it was those villages that helped me propel me to what we are doing now. So I just wanted to be able to give that back to the children in the community. As far as the biggest thing about advocacy, I was not born an advocate, and most people are not born an advocate. You become an advocate because of your circumstances. And what was happening in my childcare center and other childcare centers is that we were constantly having things happen to us without anybody informing us or informing us after it was happening, like, hey, here's this bill. This is how we need you to implement it inside your center. It's unfunded, by the way. So all of these things, but we decided, you know what? This is not going to continue to happen. We are not going to allow people to just assume or be silent because silence means approval. So with that being said, when Libby came and was just like, hey, we're trying to dream big. We have this coalition that we want to form, and we know that we can't do it without the provider's voice. It was all up, and I want to be clear, a trusted partner came and said that, and knew that, okay, this is how we can do this. It was something that I had to immediately jump on with Go Far Louisiana. And for Providers by Providers, we wanted to make sure that our voice was heard. We were grateful for our allies. We were grateful for the people who were out there supporting us, but there's no one that can tell our story like I can, right? You can't tell that I am up late at night trying to figure out how to pay payroll, how to support my teachers. The fact that I also just went to sleep because I had to cook the night before to make sure that there's something for the kids to have the next morning, right? So it was all of those things, and we wanted to be able to drive change.
So the Providers by Providers component of that, and along with Go Far Louisiana, so those are both like coalition building and two really important parts. Tell me how did those two things work together? And Libby, let's get started with you, and then Rochelle, I want to hear from your perspective.
Sure. So within Go Far Louisiana, we have 5 goal areas. One of the goal areas is around a provider and family-driven system. Another one is around a healthy start. The third is a net that works. The fourth is childcare for everyone, everywhere. And the fifth is around family-friendly workplaces. So we have implementation partners that are basically policy leads and practitioner leads in each of those 5 goal areas. And so the place where we intersect, Rochelle and I both intersect with Go Far, is around a provider and family driven system and childcare for everyone, everywhere. And so the ability that we created this big umbrella, really focused on early childhood systems as a whole with a racial equity lens. We were very clear about that. And so, having implementation partners, really, quite frankly, Rochelle said, trusted partners, deep friendships, long-standing relationships. Like, we can have the whole hard conversations. We can have the conversations of that wasn't a good look. We need to figure that out better for the next time. And so being able to interact with Go Far and 4P by P, they just fit together. The other piece of it is that 4P by P has really changed the narrative and the game of how we do this advocacy work. It gives me chill, like I've got chills right now. Because what it's done is it's put providers at the forefront where they should be. It's put providers in the rooms where they have always should have been. And it allows us to have some really technical and tedious conversations about how do we make this better? Because what we know within Go Far, and Rochelle knows within 4P by P, is that community always knows what they need. And so it's really having the intersection of the work come together so that we can really listen to community and move the ball forward. And boy, have we.
So Rochelle, having been a provider, I'm wondering, how do you sustain that interest and energy of advocacy for Providers by Providers when there's also that very difficult providing work that's happening in the early education component of their work life?
So absolutely. So one, let me just say, For Providers by Providers is the only provider-led nonprofit in the state of Louisiana. And our goal is around building leadership capacity, public policy, business acumen, wealth building, and those things. So when you say, how do we do it, is because we start with leadership development, right? Building capacity. The fact is that I had to build capacity inside my centers, and then we do that by teaching others to build capacity inside, so I can work on my center. I can advocate for my center. The thing is that we're often, as a provider, this is your legacy. You are developing children and families, but you're also developing staff. This is why we also want because we are building their capacity, we want to make sure that they're paid. And I don't just say a living wage. I want them to have a compensation package. Any professional organization, any professional career has a compensation package. And that is not something that should be a luxury. So it is something that should be, they should have, just as they're being hired as a teacher. With that being said, there are not, and that's why Libby and I work so well together, because there are times where I'm not interested in reading a 30, 60, or even a 10-page bill, right? I don't have that's not my ministry. That is not in my capacity. So having a trusted partner like Louisiana Policy Institute for Children, who can say, hey, this bill just came out, or there's something that, we need you guys to look at. And then we can look at that and say, oh no, this is an unintentional consequence of this bill, or this is how this is going to impact us. And then we could move forward. So it's really the core conspirators piece of this, where we can get in there together and lean into our lanes, and then work together to drive this car and go far. So when you say, how do we do it all? We have to do it together. We link arm in arm with other providers, talk to them about, hey, this is what's going on. Let's do some advocacy training. Let's do some role playing. Let's do some things to make sure that you are comfortable in telling your story and how this will impact what is going on in not only your life, but your teachers' lives and the lives of your children and families. So it is really about building capacity. And we have what's called Let's Talk Advocacy call every my apologies, I thought I turned the phone. Every week. It is not working, sorry. Every 3 times out of the month, where we literally, based on conversations that we've had with Louisiana Policy Institute for Children and some of our other partners like Power Coalition and those are able to educate providers on what's going on. So it's constant communication where we are talking, so we can continue to build up people's capacity.
Yeah, it's such difficult and very important work, and impressive that you've that you've been able to pull this off. And I'm curious, in that process, because it is so difficult, it's got to come with some lessons learned along the way and some struggles here and there. Can the two of you tell us a little bit about what that's been like? What lessons have you learned along the way?
So absolutely. So one of the things that I would like to is that most of our providers are privately owned centers, right? And so again, this is small businesses that are taking a chance on advocating to say, you know what, we want to thrive. So with that being said, some of the challenges are adverse actions, or people calling, like we had this picture that's behind me is the day without childcare. We had over 1,000 providers, children, families at the Capitol. What we were told is that it was the largest showing on the Capitol since Huey P. Long was governor. And that's been a long time. So the fact is that around organizing this, there were several people that called and were just like, hey, don't do this. This is seen as this big sign of protest. This could be an adverse action. We got, there was some emails that went out saying, hey, we know that you're participating in this. This day can be held against you and may be potentially affect some of your funding. And so people were scared, like, oh my God, don't do this. It was all of those things. But my call to them, or my line of action to them, was, if we don't do this, we will continue to be an oppressed people. Right? We will continue to allow people who are not in our shoes to navigate and to determine what are next steps for us. And that is not okay. And so, to Libby's point, seeing those buses roll in, seeing those moms with strollers, and this was also the same day as Dad's Day at the Capitol, which it was amazing to see that, you know, people stood in their power. So yeah, there are difficulties, you know, there's some times where there's pushback, and I know Libby will talk a little bit more about the legislative side, but you just have to keep moving.
And I think one of the things about Day Without Childcare, and Rochelle was at the foot of the steps, and you see 1,000 people, awe-inspiring. And she's like, "We're not here to protest. We're here for a purpose." And so, you know, when Rochelle was like, she's getting emails and calls about, "Are you sure? Like, are you going to do this?" We were getting similar ones. Because we were helping to support 4P in the background, and put our, you know, they allowed us to have our logo as partners. And my comment, I remember, Rochelle, we were standing in the rotunda, and I was like, "This is not the riskiest thing I've ever done." Like, this was not something that I felt as an organization we needed to worry about. And the cool thing about that is that we were the talk, our providers were the talk at the Capitol literally for 2 weeks. And so, like, you have to take calculated risk, but this was not a calculated risk. Other lessons learned too are around, you know, like framing. What language do we use? How do we use the language that we need to use? Who are the front people we need to put up from time to time? Maybe it's not Rochelle or myself. You know, we had a tax credit bill that with a shift that we wanted to make in it. We knew as an organization, we were doing all the back end work, but we weren't the ones to be up in front of it. And so we got our economic developers involved, and they were the front face. And then we're sending texts to our partners to say, "Hey, can you put in a green card here?" Those types of things. So knowing the language we need to use, being able to stomach the language that is said to us is another piece, you know, and that's just real talk. And then the piece of like knowing how to leverage your partnerships along the way, because it doesn't always have to be one of us. You know, Rochelle mentioned this earlier. There are rooms that she's like, "Libby, I'm not going in there. You have to," and I'm like, "You got it." And then there are other rooms that I don't need to be in. And understanding that and being able to be honest about it, I think, is always a lesson. And being able to be reflective of like, this went really well. How would we switch this? Those types of things. So we know what Day Without Childcare is going to look like next year. We're already starting to think about that, you know, because we want to make sure it's the most impactful thing that we can do. But having multiple days at the Capitol, I think we had 4 this year, for between Dad's Day, Day Without Childcare, Early Ed Day, and our Go Far Day at the Capitol. Is like just having a presence with our people is really, really important.
Libby and Rochelle, thank you for being a presence with us here today. You've enriched us and I think inspired us. And thank you again for the very important, very difficult work that you do. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague, Kim.
And thank you, Libby and Rochelle. It's good to see you all again. And I told you guys they were inspiring. So thanks for continuing work over in Louisiana. We'll be in touch soon. All right, we've got a few more slides to go before we wrap it up. So Erica's going to share the slide. You can skip over that one. It's me again. They don't know me by now. Yeah, thanks, Erica. So there you go. My head is full. I can't even form words at this point. My heart is overjoyed by the conversation, all the ideas and the energy that all of our speakers have brought us. But a few little things about what's next. Okay, now that we've all been inspired and energized, and our heads are starting to think creatively about what could we create in Texas for children and families and for childcare providers and the professionals around them. So here are some to-dos, things that we do know at this point. So like Mandy said, the Governor's Task Force for Governance and the Quad Agency Child Care Initiative Commission are both brand new entities. Those were passed this last legislative session. TEA is leading the Governor's Task Force, and TWC is leading the Quad Agency Child Care Initiative Commission. We know the Quad Agency Commission has to meet by the end of the calendar year. That's written into the bill language, but we don't have any more data for either information for either of them at this point. So stay tuned for those two, because those opportunities will be forthcoming. We just don't have any more details as we're waiting on agencies to get all those things figured out, as well as all their Sunset Commission self-reports ready and all the things that they are working on. For Sunset Review Advisory Commission, that's not a new process. And so while we don't have specifics, we do have a timeline. So the slide in front of you is from the sunset texas.gov website, and you are all welcome to go there and dig around. You can also look at agencies' previous Sunset reports, which are also quite interesting. So you can see what they did 10 or 12 years ago when they had the Sunset Review. So we know the self-reports are self-evaluations for each agency are due to the Sunset Commission in September. They're all working on those now. We also are anticipating the legislative appointments from both the House and the Senate to sit on the commission. We've been told that can happen anywhere between now or September and November. So we will, if that all goes on track, so we will keep you posted. We know there'll be representatives from both. We know they will hold public hearings. So remember that there are 4 state agencies going through Sunset. So depending on which agencies you want to be involved with or following, there's lots of chance for engagement. And so they will do all this work between the time the commission is set with which legislative officials in the Sunset Commission, and next January, they will be working on gathering the public information and writing reports on what those recommendations are. The final reports will be due in February of 2027 to the legislature, and then in January of 27 through May, during our 90th legislative session, they will consider the set of sunset bills that for each of different agencies. So that's kind of the process over the next 17 months. There's a lot more details that we still don't know, but we will keep you informed. So I think someone is dropping a link to our ECE newsletter. If you haven't joined that newsletter yet, please do. Please sign up, and that way we will keep you informed as hearings get set and opportunities happen. Please stay informed. So thank you for that. All right, Erica, next slide. We also want to remind you that our in-person Texas tour is coming in October. We do this tour biannually, twice a year. In the spring, we do it virtually, but in October, we get to come out and see you all in person. So if you're in one of these cities, we will be in a city near you. We will start working on, we're working on that now that the summit's over, we'll start working on scheduling those. So stay tuned for those dates in the next few weeks. And then we're also working on our childcare survey. With all of these things happening, we wanted to make sure we gave childcare providers a voice. So stay tuned for that as well over the next few weeks on our newsletter. We are putting the finishing touches on that survey. And so if you are a childcare provider, please fill it out. If you work with childcare providers, please send that out to your community so that way we can gather that information on that piece. All right, Erica, next. We have our next Texas Early Learning learning event is in September. This one is around national immigration, from harm to hope, supporting kids and empowering communities through advocacy and service. Note that this one is starting at noon. Most of these start at 10, so there is a time difference to accommodate some of our partners that are joining us on the West Coast. So stay tuned for that one. And then the last slide is give us your feedback. We want to make sure we are doing these learning events that are relevant to you and your community. So please scan that link. There's scan the QR code. There's a link in the chat. And as a reminder, there will be a follow-up email with the recording, the slide deck, and any resources that were shared in the chat that will go out to everyone who registered. So thank you so much for being here. those of us that stuck with us the entire time. So extremely thankful for your time and energy. Those of you that are watching later because you couldn't make it this time frame, but watching the recording, we appreciate you being here as well. And thank you for all you do for children and for families across Texas. And we are thankful for your partnership. And with that, have a great Thursday, and we'll see you soon.